The American Civil War didn't begin with the first shot at Fort Sumter. It began with a delicate balance that was destined to collapse. In 1819, the United States stood precariously divided, 11 free states and 11 slave states, creating what appeared to be perfect harmony from the outside. But beneath this surface lay a fundamental contradiction that would tear the nation apart. The crisis began when Missouri Territory applied for statehood as a slave state, threatening to upset the carefully maintained balance in Congress. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 temporarily resolved this by admitting Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state, while establishing the 36 degrees 30 minutes parallel as the boundary between slave and free territories. This created a dangerous precedent of adding one slave state for every free state. America's expansion westward, driven by manifest destiny, repeatedly challenged this fragile balance. The Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848 brought massive territorial gains, including California, Arizona, New Mexico, and parts of modern-day Colorado, Utah, Nevada, and Wyoming. The Compromise of 1850 attempted another solution. California entered as a free state, but the Fugitive Slave Act required all Americans to assist in returning escaped slaves. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 proved to be the spark that ignited Bleeding Kansas. By allowing popular sovereignty to determine slavery's status in new territories, the act triggered massive migration of both pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers into Kansas Territory. The result was unprecedented violence, with 50 to 200 deaths over 4 years as America rehearsed for civil war. Two distinct Americas were emerging with incompatible worldviews. The industrializing North increasingly viewed slavery as morally wrong and economically obsolete. The agricultural South had become even more dependent on slave labor following the cotton gin's invention, with cotton production exploding from 73,000 bales in 1800 to over 4 million by 1860. The Dred Scott decision of 1857 ruled that African Americans could never be citizens, and Congress had no power to prohibit slavery in territories. John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry in 1859 terrified the South while inspiring Northern abolitionists. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 was the final straw. South Carolina seceded immediately, followed by 10 more states forming the Confederate States of America under Jefferson Davis. At 4:30 a.m. on April 12, 1861, a mortar shell exploded over Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, marking the beginning of the American Civil War. Major Robert Anderson commanded just 85 men against 6,000 Confederate troops with superior artillery positions. The standoff had been building for months. South Carolina demanded all federal property, while Lincoln faced an impossible choice: evacuate and legitimize secession, or reinforce and risk war. When Lincoln announced plans to resupply the fort, Confederate President Jefferson Davis ordered the attack. For 34 hours, Confederate artillery pounded the fort relentlessly. Despite thousands of shells fired, remarkably no one died during the bombardment. The only casualties came during the surrender ceremony when a cannon misfired, killing the war's first victim. Lincoln's response was swift. He called for 75,000 volunteers to suppress the insurrection. This triggered 4 more states to join the Confederacy. The Union now faced 11 Confederate states with 9 million people, including 3.5 million slaves. While the Union held overwhelming advantages in population, railroads, and industrial production, the Confederacy had experienced military leaders like Robert E. Lee, who declined Lincoln's offer to command Union forces. The South would fight defensively on familiar territory. As the nation plunged into civil war, public opinion demanded quick action. "On to Richmond," cried Northern newspapers, confident one battle would end the rebellion. This overconfidence led to disaster at First Bull Run on July 21, 1861. General Irvin McDowell's 35,000 troops, the largest army ever assembled in North America, marched toward Richmond with civilians following. Expecting to witness a glorious victory, instead, they witnessed the first demonstration that this would be a long, bloody conflict. Confederate reinforcements arrived by railroad, and Union forces collapsed in panicked retreat. What began as orderly withdrawal became chaotic rout as soldiers, civilians, and congressmen fled together back to Washington. Bull Run shattered illusions on both sides. Northerners realized they faced a real war requiring massive mobilization. Southerners understood they confronted an enemy with vastly superior resources who wouldn't give up easily. The 90-day war both sides expected would consume 4 years and cost over 600,000 lives. The year 1862 began with both sides grimly determined to fight a war that had proven longer and bloodier than anticipated. In the Western Theater, an unknown Union general named Ulysses S. Grant began demonstrating the aggressive leadership the North needed. Grant's assault on Fort Donelson in February proved crucial. When Confederate General Simon Buckner requested surrender terms, Grant's reply became legendary. No terms except unconditional and immediate surrender can be accepted. This victory opened the gateway to the Confederate heartland and gave the Union control of crucial Tennessee and Cumberland rivers. In the Eastern Theater, General George McClellan's Peninsula Campaign transported 100,000 men to attack Richmond via the Virginia Peninsula. McClellan was brilliant at organizing and training troops, but proved overly cautious in battle. When Confederate General Joseph Johnston was wounded at Seven Pines, Jefferson Davis appointed Robert E. Lee to command, a decision that transformed the war. Lee immediately launched the 7 Days Battles, driving McClellan's superior army away from Richmond despite suffering heavier casualties. Lee's willingness to accept enormous losses for strategic gains characterized Confederate strategy for the war's remainder. The year's bloodiest day came at Antietam on September 17th. Lee launched his first invasion of the North, but Union soldiers discovered his detailed battle plans wrapped around cigars. Despite this intelligence coup, McClellan's hesitation prevented decisive victory. The battle produced over 23,000 casualties, but forced Lee to retreat, ending the Confederate invasion. Antietam proved strategically decisive, giving Lincoln political capital to issue the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. This transformed the war from preserving the Union to ending slavery, making European intervention for the Confederacy virtually impossible. The year concluded with disaster at Fredericksburg in December. General Ambrose Burnside ordered repeated frontal assaults against Lee's impregnable positions, resulting in over 12,000 Union casualties. Confederate defenders behind stone walls methodically destroyed wave after wave of attacks. In the West, the Battle of Shiloh shocked both sides with unprecedented carnage. Grant's forces were surprised, but ultimately victorious after reinforcements arrived. The battle's 23,000 combined casualties exceeded all previous American battles, providing a grim preview of escalating brutality. Union naval forces achieved significant victories, capturing New Orleans and Memphis, giving them control of most of the Mississippi River. Only Vicksburg remained in Confederate hands, earning the nickname Gibraltar of the Confederacy. Despite Union advantages, 1862 ended with Confederate morale surprisingly high. Lee had saved Richmond and proven Southern armies could defeat larger Union forces. January 1, 1863, marked a pivotal transformation with Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. While it didn't immediately free all slaves, it fundamentally changed the war from preserving the Union to ending slavery. Most importantly, it authorized black men to join Union forces. Nearly 200,000 would eventually serve, fighting for their own liberation. The Union implemented conscription for the first time, but wealthy men could pay $300 to avoid service. This sparked the New York draft riots in July, the deadliest civil unrest in American history, as working-class whites, fearing competition from freed slaves, attacked black neighborhoods and institutions. In the Western Theater, Grant's Vicksburg campaign represented brilliant strategy. After failed direct assaults, Grant marched his army down the Mississippi's west bank, crossed south of the city, and attacked from an unexpected direction. This risky move cut his supply lines but caught Confederate defenders off guard. Grant won rapid victories at Port Gibson, Raymond, Jackson, Champion Hill, and Big Black River Bridge, driving Confederate General John Pemberton into Vicksburg's fortifications. The siege began May 18th, trapping 29,000 Confederate defenders and 3,000 civilians. Union artillery bombarded the city continuously, forcing residents into caves. Food became so scarce, people ate mules, rats, and leather. After 47 days, Pemberton surrendered on July 4th, a symbolic choice for Independence Day. Vicksburg's fall gave the Union complete control of the Mississippi River, splitting the Confederacy in two and cutting off Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas. Simultaneously, the war's most famous battle raged at Gettysburg. Lee's second invasion of the North brought 75,000 Confederates against 95,000 Union troops. What began as an accidental encounter escalated into the largest battle in North American history. 3 days of fighting, July 1st through 3rd, produced unprecedented carnage. The first day saw Confederates drive Union forces to defensive positions on Cemetery Hill. The second day witnessed desperate fighting at Little Round Top, Devil's Den, and the Peach Orchard. The climax came July 3rd with Pickett's charge, 15,000 Confederate troops advancing across open ground against entrenched Union positions. Preceded by the largest artillery bombardment in Western Hemisphere history, Pickett's charge failed catastrophically. Confederate infantry were systematically destroyed by Union artillery and rifle fire. Lee lost 28,000 casualties, nearly 40% of his army. Combined with Vicksburg's fall, Gettysburg represented the war's turning point. The Confederacy never again possessed strength to threaten Union territory. Lincoln's Gettysburg Address 4 months later redefined the war's purpose, that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom. Lincoln's promotion of Grant to General-in-Chief marked a shift to coordinated nationwide strategy. Grant understood that Union advantages in manpower and resources required simultaneous application across multiple theaters to prevent Confederate forces from shifting troops. Grant's overland campaign began with the horrific Battle of the Wilderness in dense Virginia forest. Armies clashed in what participants called bushwhacking on a grand scale. Undergrowth caught fire, burning wounded soldiers alive. Unlike previous commanders, Grant refused to retreat after tactical defeat, ordering his army to continue south toward Richmond. The battles of Spotsylvania and Cold Harbor followed, each more savage than the last. At Cold Harbor, Grant ordered a disastrous frontal assault, resulting in 7,000 casualties in less than an hour. Grant's strategy of attrition earned him the nickname the Butcher, but he understood the Union could replace losses while the Confederacy could not. In 6 weeks, Grant lost 55,000 men, but accomplished his objective of pinning Lee's forces in defensive positions around Petersburg. The 10-month siege that followed slowly strangled Lee's army while Union forces grew stronger. Sherman's Atlanta campaign demonstrated total war principles. With 100,000 men, Sherman employed continuous flanking maneuvers against Confederate General Joseph Johnston. When Jefferson Davis replaced the defensive Johnston with aggressive John Bell Hood, it proved disastrous. Hood's attacks bled his army white, leading to Atlanta's fall on September 2nd. Sherman's march to the sea represented total war at its most devastating. His 62,000-man army cut a 60-mile swath of destruction across Georgia, destroying railroads, plantations, and anything supporting the Confederate war effort. "War is hell," Sherman declared, intending to make the South feel it completely. The march was calculated to demonstrate the Confederacy's inability to protect its territory. Sherman's army destroyed 100 million in property while living off the land, proving Confederate territory could no longer provide sanctuary. The psychological impact equaled the physical destruction as Southern morale collapsed. Philip Sheridan's campaign in the Shenandoah Valley systematically destroyed the breadbasket of the Confederacy, eliminating another source of Confederate supplies. Union victories at Atlanta and in the Valley secured Lincoln's re-election against George McClellan's peace platform. By year's end, Sherman captured Savannah, presenting it to Lincoln as a Christmas gift. The Confederacy was effectively defeated, though Southern leaders hadn't acknowledged this reality. Total war had accomplished what traditional strategy failed to achieve: complete destruction of the South's will to resist. As 1865 dawned, The Confederacy existed more as stubborn idea than functioning nation. Sherman's march north into South Carolina carried particular vindictive fury. The state that started the war would pay the heaviest price. Columbia burned on February 17th. Whether by design or accident remains debated, but half the city was reduced to ashes. Confederate resistance crumbled everywhere. Fort Fisher fell in January, closing the last major Atlantic port. Wilmington, Charleston, and other coastal cities followed as Confederate defenders conducted fighting retreats toward the interior. Lee, recognizing his hopeless position, attempted one final gamble. On March 25th, General John Gordon launched a surprise dawn attack on Fort Stedman, hoping to break Grant's siege. The attack initially succeeded, but Union counterattacks quickly restored their lines, costing Lee 2,600 irreplaceable casualties. Grant's response was overwhelming. The Battle of Five Forks on April 1st saw Sheridan's forces smash the Confederate right flank, cutting the last railroad into Petersburg. Lee could no longer supply his army or maintain defensive lines against Grant's 125,000 troops. The evacuation of Petersburg and Richmond on April 2nd and 3rd marked the Confederacy's effective death. Jefferson Davis fled south as government buildings burned. Union troops marched into the Confederate capital April 3rd, with Lincoln touring the conquered city as freed slaves celebrated in the streets. Lee's retreat became a nightmare of exhaustion and desertion. Confederate soldiers, many barefoot and starving, abandoned by the thousands. At Sailor's Creek on April 6th, a third of Lee's remaining army was captured. Lee reportedly said, "My God, has the army dissolved? I cannot sacrifice this army," Lee told his staff. "There is nothing left for me to do but to go and see General Grant." The surrender occurred in Wilmer McLean's parlor, the same man whose property had been used during First Bull Run. Grant's terms were generous. Officers kept sidearms and horses, all soldiers were paroled, and the Union provided food for Lee's starving army. When Grant's men began celebrating, he silenced them. "The war is over, the rebels are our countrymen again." Other Confederate armies surrendered throughout April and May. The last battle occurred at Palmito Ranch, Texas, on May 12 to 13. Ironically, a Confederate victory more than a month after Lee's surrender. When the guns fell silent, America comprehended the staggering price paid for preserving the Union and ending slavery. Over 620,000 Americans died, more than all other American wars combined until Vietnam. The Union lost 365,000 soldiers, the Confederacy 290,000, with additional civilian deaths and hundreds of thousands of freed slaves who died during war's chaos. The economic cost was equally devastating. Direct costs reached $6.7 billion, roughly $100 billion today, while total economic impact, including destroyed property and lost productivity, reached astronomical levels. The South's economy lay in ruins, with cities like Atlanta and Columbia reduced to rubble and railroad networks systematically destroyed. Beyond statistics lay human tragedy. Entire families were wiped out, leaving tens of thousands of widows and orphans. The average soldier was just 25, meaning America lost much of a generation's potential. Advances in medicine kept more soldiers alive, but meant more returned with devastating injuries. Missing limbs were so common, several states established artificial limb programs. The conflict had transformed from traditional warfare into modern total war. Sherman's March and Sheridan's Valley Campaign introduced warfare against entire populations and economic systems. These tactics would influence military thinking for decades, previewing World War I's industrial warfare. Technology evolved rapidly. The war saw first use of railroads for military logistics, telegraph communications, photography for documentation, and experiments with ironclads, submarines, and aerial reconnaissance. Rifled muskets made traditional tactics obsolete, leading to trench warfare development. Most significantly, the war altered American understanding of federal power. Before 1861, people said the United States are. After 1865, it became the United States is. Federal government supremacy over state authority was established through force. creating precedents for federal power continuing today. The Emancipation Proclamation and 200,000 black soldiers transformed the conflict's meaning from preserving union to securing freedom. Though equality's promise remained unfulfilled for another century, Lincoln's assassination on April 14th robbed the nation of the leader best positioned to heal wounds. The martyred president had spoken of malice toward none, charity for all, but his death left Reconstruction to those less committed to reconciliation. Lincoln's assassination at Ford's Theater on April 14, 1865, sent shockwaves through a traumatized nation. John Wilkes Booth's bullet killed the great emancipator and destroyed the best hope for merciful peace. Now he belongs to the ages, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton reportedly said, but Lincoln left behind a nation requiring physical, economic, and spiritual rebuilding. The immediate aftermath was chaos. 4 million enslaved people were suddenly free, but freedom meant little without land, education, or economic opportunity. The Freedmen's Bureau provided some assistance, but was overwhelmed by the task's magnitude. Many former slaves found themselves working the same plantations under sharecropping systems, maintaining virtual bondage. President Andrew Johnson favored lenient Reconstruction, quickly restoring political rights to former Confederates. This horrified radical Republicans, demanding fundamental changes to Southern society. The resulting conflict led to Johnson's impeachment in 1868. He survived removal by one Senate vote. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments secured freedom, citizenship, and voting rights for former slaves. During radical Reconstruction, Black Americans participated actively in Southern politics. Hundreds served in state legislatures and Congress, with Hiram Revels and Blanche Bruce becoming the first black U.S. senators. But progress proved temporary. The Compromise of 1877, settling the disputed Hayes-Tilden election, effectively ended Reconstruction. Federal troops withdrew from the South, abandoning black Americans to unreconstructed white supremacists. The Ku Klux Klan and similar terrorist organizations, along with black codes and later Jim Crow laws, systematically stripped away black political gains. Poll taxes, literacy tests, and violent intimidation reduced black voting to near zero. Lynching became a racial control tool, with over 3,000 documented cases between 1877 to 1950. Economic recovery took decades. The South remained primarily agricultural and impoverished into the 20th century. Northern industrial capitalism, strengthened by wartime production, dominated the national economy. The Transcontinental Railroad, completed in 1869, symbolized America's westward expansion and industrial might. The war's memory became a battleground itself. Lost cause mythology romanticized the Confederacy while minimizing slavery's role. Confederate monuments erected during Jim Crow and civil rights eras reinforced white supremacy while presenting sanitized Southern history. The American Civil War ended 160 years ago, but its consequences continue shaping our nation. The conflict established precedents and created institutions defining modern America, while unresolved tensions still echo through politics, culture, and society. Most fundamentally, the war settled secession forever. No state has seriously attempted to leave the Union since 1865, and federal supremacy over state authority became permanently established. Massive wartime expansion of federal power, from income tax to transcontinental railroad, created the foundation for the modern American state. Industrial and technological innovations accelerated America's transformation into a global power. Wartime production capacity, combined with vast resources and growing population, positioned the United States as the world's leading economy by 1900. The same organizational skills and industrial might that won the Civil War proved decisive in 2 world wars. Most importantly, the war made real the founding promise that all men are created equal. Although true equality remained elusive for another century, the Civil War established that slavery was incompatible with American values. The service of 200,000 black soldiers proved their citizenship claim, even when later generations denied it. The war's memory became a battleground. Lost cause mythology romanticized the Confederacy while minimizing slavery's role. Confederate monuments erected during Jim Crow and civil rights movements reinforced white supremacy. These monuments remain controversial as America grapples with its racial past. The Civil War established America's citizen-soldier tradition. Unlike European professional armies, Civil War forces comprised ordinary citizens returning to civilian life afterward. This democratic military tradition proved crucial in later conflicts from World War I through Afghanistan. Literature, film, and popular culture kept Civil War memory alive, though often in distorted forms. From Gone with the Wind to modern documentaries, popular depictions influenced how Americans understand their history, sometimes reinforcing myths rather than reality. Today, historians debate the war's meaning and necessity. Was it an irrepressible conflict between incompatible systems, or could compromise have preserved the Union without war? Could slavery have been ended peacefully? These questions remain relevant as America struggles with racial inequality and regional divisions. The Civil War proved Americans would fight and die for their principles, whether preserving Union or defending their way of life. That passionate commitment to ideals, both noble and flawed, continues characterizing American political culture. Understanding this complex legacy helps explain both America's greatest achievements and persistent challenges in the ongoing struggle to fulfill equality and justice for all.